Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. For this video, we are going to talk about an overview of inclusive education. For the past topics that we discussed about special education. Now, let's emphasize what is an inclusive education. Okay, the Department of Education strongly advocates inclusive education as a basic service for all types of exceptional children. In the 1994 Conference on Special Needs Education held in Salamanca, Spain, the participants reaffirmed the right to education of every individual to education as enshrined in the 1984 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The reaffirmation served as a renewal of the pledge made by the world community at the 1990 World Conference on Education for All. With these declarations and the urgency of the need for the early intervention, the Department of Education adopted the policy of inclusive education in 1997. A handbook on inclusive education was issued as the main reference and guide to the practice of inclusive education. National, regional, and even division wide training on inclusive education were conducted to promote the concept of inclusive education. Now, what will you learn after this chapter? You are expected to answer the following questions based on your understanding. Number one, what is inclusive education? Hmm, why inclusive education? Where does inclusive education come from? How can we facilitate inclusive education? Who are vulnerable to exclusion and marginalization? Okay, so before we proceed to our topic, let's first have a refresher. Four picks, one definition. Look at the picture show in your screen. Hmm, what do you think is the appropriate term for all of these pictures? Okay, if you know the answer, leave it in the comment section. Okay, now let's proceed to inclusive education. Now, what is inclusive education? It is a wide range of strategies that seek to make a reality of the universal right to equality, relevant, and appropriate education. Now, this is a s- where a school accepts children with special needs for enrollment in regular classes where they can learn side by side with their peers. The school organizes its special education program and includes a special education teacher in its faculty. The school provides the mainstream where regular teachers and special education teachers organize and implement appropriate programs for both special and regular students. Okay, do you now know what's the difference between inclusive and special education? Let's find out another definition of inclusive education. These acknowledge that learning begins at birth and continues throughout life and includes learning in the home, the community, and informal and non-formal situations. So inclusion means implementing and maintaining warm and accepting classroom communities that embrace and respect diversity or differences. Teachers and students take active steps to understand individual differences and create an atmosphere of respect. Okay, now what do inclusive education seeks? It enables communities, systems, and structures in all cultures and contexts to combat discrimination, celebrate diversity, promote participation, and overcome barriers to learning and participation for all people. Now, inclusion implements a multi-level, multi-modality curriculum. This means that special needs students follow an adaptive curriculum and use special devices and materials to learn at a suitable pace. Now, inclusive education is a part of a wider strategy promoting inclusive development with the goal of creating a world where there is peace, tolerance, sustainable use of resources, social justice, and where the basic needs and rights of all are met. Inclusion prepares regular teacher and special education teachers to teach interactively. The classroom model, where one teacher teaches an entire group of children single handedly, is being replaced by structures where students work together, teach one another, and participate actively in class activities. Students tend to learn with and from each other rather than compete with each other. Now, inclusive education refers to a universal right to be educated anytime and anywhere with the purpose of combating discrimination, celebrating diversity, and creating a world of peace and tolerance. So, meaning to say, no student will be left behind in an inclusive education. Okay? Both normal students and students with special needs will work together to promote peace and have respect to one another. Okay, now the UNESCO definition of inclusion is seen as the process of addressing and responding to the diversity of needs of all learners through increasing participation in learning cultures and communities, and reducing exclusion within and from education. Okay, now, an educationally inclusive school is one with the teaching and learning, achievements, attitudes, and well-being of every young person matters. Effective schools are educationally inclusive school. As I said earlier, there will be no students who will be left behind when we promote inclusive education in our school. Now, true or false? Act your answer. Number one, inclusive education is another name for special education. Hmm, is this true or false? Leave your answers in the comment box. Teacher will teach right after you comment. Okay. Now, hmm, IE concepts have much more in common with the concepts that underpin education for all. Is it true or false? Now, IE or inclusive education is a shift from being preoccupied with a particular group to a focus on overcoming barriers to learning and participation. Hmm, leave your answers. Okay, now let's also have question number four. All differences are acknowledged and respected in inclusive education except health status and disability. Number five, inclusive education is about changing the student to fit the system, not changing the system to fit the student. Okay, now, inclusive education or not inclusive education? Reverse your action. Assumes that there is a separate group of children who have special education needs. Is it an inclusive education? Mm, 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 mm. Now, brings the children with disabilities into a mainstream schools and must be ready for integration rather than school being made ready. Now, special classrooms or buildings that are attached to a mainstream school for special educational needs with special teacher. Bringing an issue from the margins into the mainstream, getting disability issues mainstream in the education for all and schools improvement debates and process. Now, why inclusive education? Okay, supply the missing letters represented by numbers. So please answer it in the comment section. Okay, and also don't forget to write your name, full name, in your course year and section. Thank you, everyone. Now, education is a basic human right. Hmm. It's a 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, education for all is a policy signed by 155 nations and 150 donors or non-government officials. Okay, according to World Declaration on Education for All, the learning needs of disabled demand special attention. Steps need to be taken to provide equal access to education to every category of disabled persons as an integral part of the education system. Now, to celebrate diversity and eliminate discrimination in education. So, meaning to say, education for all do not promote discrimination. It eliminates discrimination in education. We promote um, we promote non-discrimination in education. We celebrate diversity or differences. Now, poverty reduction and development. That's one of the reasons why education for all is implemented. Now, to have better achievement and confidence. Okay, and let's proceed to where does inclusive education come from? So we have here Philippine legal basis for inclusive education. The 1987 Philippine Constitution, Article 4, Section 2, mandates the state to encourage non-formal, informal, and indigenous learning systems, as well as learning independent and out-of-school youth study programs, and to provide adult citizens, disabled and out-of-school youth with training on civics, vocational efficiency, and other skills. Now, other legal basis for inclusive education, we have Presidential Decree 603, the Child and Youth Welfare Code. This article states this for accounts to the rights of the child. Also, we have Republic Act 7610, Special Protection of Children Against Child Abuse, Exploitation and Discrimination Act. Article 1, Section 1 states that the comprehensive program shall be formulated to protect children against any form of abuse which endanger child survival and normal development. Okay. Are you familiar with these legal bases? Because it is also for special education. Now, we proceed to Republic Act 7277 or 7277, the Magna Carta for Disabled Person, amended by Republic Act 9442. It provides for the rehabilitation, self-development, and self-reliance of disabled persons and their integration into the mainstream of society. Okay. Now, Philippine legal basis for inclusive education, we also have policies and guidelines in special education, Article 1, Section 5 states that the ultimate goal of special education shall be the integration or mainstream of learners with special needs into the regular school systems and eventually into the community. Okay, now we have here Philippines adopts international documents on inclusive education. So, as what I've said earlier, the Department of Education strongly advocates inclusive education. This is from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child on 1989. Also, we have World Declaration on Education for All and UNESCO Salamanca Statement and Framework for Action. Okay, how can we facilitate inclusive education? Hmm. If there is a skeleton, flesh, and lifeblood of inclusive education, what do each of them stands for in terms of facilitating inclusive education? So look and listen. So we have here key ingredients for a strong, appropriate, flexible, inclusive education program. So this is interconnected. You have the framework foundation, the legal basis, laws and policies. We have the learners, parents, community, and also we have educational institution, educators, and teachers. So these key ingredient is to have strong and appropriate inclusive education program. So they are connected from the legal basis to the students, to the teachers, again to the basis, and to the learners. So it's an interconnected program. All right. Who are vulnerable to inclusion and marginalization? Children with disabilities, child laborers, children of indigenous peoples and Muslim children, abused children, street children. S- As a future educator, we should not these people left behind in education. Make them feel that education is for all. Okay, future educators. Now, let's have facts and figures. So, children with disabilities who are in school are about 1 101,762. This is data from 2011. Children with disabilities are still combating educational exclusion. 97.3% of them are still unreached. About 5,916 are mainstream in regular classes. Starting from now, do encourage those people. Now, education is free. You are part of free education. So encourage those people that you know who are not going to school anymore. Please do encourage them. This is for their own good. All right. So also facts and figures. We have children of indigenous people number about 12 to 15 million across the country. These are spread in 7 ethnographic areas with 117 ethno-linguistic groups. Those in elementary schools total 639,483, while 158,550 are in the secondary schools. This is a data gathered from 2010 and 2011. 140,570 Muslim elementary and secondary pupils are attending Alive. This is Arabic language and Islamic values education in public schools. Working children are growing in number. Number of children abuse is being shut down. Also, street children are about 246,000. 75% are children on the streets. 25% are children of the streets. And also 70% are boys. Now, thank you for listening. I hope you have learned something about inclusive education. And you already know what is the difference between special education and inclusive education. If you have questions, leave it in the comment section or you may leave it in our group chat in Messenger. Thank you, everyone. See you in the next video. Goodbye. Have a nice day.